Hi there. Welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local, the podcast where you can find inspiration, tips, and recipes for enjoying more local food and drink. I am David Crowley, your host. In today's episode, we will be chatting with Erin Baumgartner about her work to reimagine America's food system. Erin is the CEO and co-founder of Family Dinner, a farmers market delivery business based in Boston, Massachusetts. Each week, Family Dinner works with local farmers and food purveyors to find New England's best ingredients and deliver them to homes in the greater Boston area, New Hampshire, and Maine. Hi, Erin. Welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, great. I will say up front for our listeners, this some kind of disclosure. I guess I have been a customer of yours for a couple of years now. A happy customer, obviously. If I keep coming back, that suggests that I'm happy. And so I'll try to be good about not assuming knowledge that folks have. So I do know something about the company, but before we start having you share sort of what the company is all about, I'd love to get a little more about your background and start with this podcast is all about local food, and that's your company is all about that too. But I'm curious, is that like a long-term passion of yours? You know, did you grow up on a farm or anything like that? Or is it kind of a newer found interest? And how did you get interested in the idea of eating more local food?
Sure. So, Family Dinner is a local farmers market delivery service, and that's kind of the front-facing story of it. But the parallel narrative is that we're trying to use data, technology, predictive analytics to shorten and really strengthen the local food supply chain and make a difference for small local purveyors. And those ideas kind of started mulling about in my previous job, where I worked for 11 years at MIT, most recently as the assistant director of the Sensible City Lab. And that group is trying to think about using those same methods, data, machine learning, predictive analytics, to understand like really big, messy, complex urban problems like waste or transport or trash. And so started to think really about like, how do you apply those same methods to something super complex and messy, which is the food supply chain. This doesn't go back, decades for me. I did grow up working in food. I worked at the local pizza shop in town for 4 years and worked on a local farm, but it wasn't my passion. It wasn't my academic background. I suppose it was then working at MIT in that environment and thinking about ways in which the food supply chain is broken and messy and inequitable, and thinking about ways in which we can apply technology, modern techniques to make it better, stronger, and more equitable.
Great. And as you say that, I know I see in your bio, I believe you're founded in 2017. So you're several years ahead of the COVID pandemic, but
yes,
the brokenness of our food supply system became apparent to pretty much everyone that was trying to get anything through like a typical means of the grocery store or what have you. So
you're exactly right, David, in that I think the pandemic really highlighted for people some of the things that we've held dear for a long time. First of which is like understanding where your food comes from is really critically important. And the pandemic put it differently. The pandemic had us thinking about not just knowing where your food comes from, but really limiting the number of hands that have touched that food throughout the process, right? And so that just comes into keeping the distance between where your food is grown and your plate as short as possible. And that really came to be clear to people in the pandemic. Never mind the added bonus of supporting local business and wanting your neighbors to remain in business and wanting your local economy and ecosystem to be strong and resilient. But you're absolutely right that the pandemic played a big role for food systems.
Yeah, great. Well, I definitely can see how that would really underscore the importance of what you're doing. But let's give a little bit of the background of how your interest came in it. But let's give folks the 101 of what Family Dinner actually does. I sort of have a sense, but explain what it works like. And I know as we have this conversation, we're going to have at 2 levels. There are folks that are probably within your service area that are listening and can sign up, and others who wish they could but can't. So we'll certainly want that latter group to get some good takeaways from the conversation. But let's explain what it looks like to a customer that signs up for Family Dinner.
Sure. Family Dinner is a local farmers market delivery service. So each week we source local meat and fish and cheese, produce, grains, and we deliver it directly to our customers' doors. And as mentioned, in the back end, we're trying to use data and technology to really tighten the local food supply chain, but with an eye on minimizing food waste, which is, I think, is something that maybe a lot of the folks who are listening here really care about. And that's certainly something that's core to us. Um, it is a weekly subscription service, but customers, it's incredibly flexible. Customers can skip any number of weeks that they want, and they can also add on a big list of allergies or aversions, things you just don't want to receive. And that is a breakaway from a traditional CSA model where you're locked in for X number of weeks and you get what you get. This is also a real bonus for farmers, I think, because we are an e-commerce subscription platform. We don't have a brick and mortar, and that means that farmers who live in a certain geography are able to access a much larger market share because we operate online and we do all the last mile logistics, we do the customer acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. So the model and the technologies and the suite of platforms that we've created just allow farmers to be farmers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yep.
so this is a great benefit to them. The benefit to the consumers, I believe, is that we're trying to source the highest quality local produce that we can. There's flexibility in timing and there's flexibility in the offering.
Yep.
And we also want it to be fun, right?
Yep.
Every week there's like a little treat that shows up with your share, like cookies or brownies or something like that, just as this moment of whimsy, which
Mm-hmm.
definitely in the pandemic, I think people realized they really loved and needed, like this, just a moment of joy.
Right.
So that is our platform. We are growing beyond just shares to have lots of different add-ons. So bread of the week, cheese of the week, fresh pasta. We want to be kind of your one-stop local grocery shop,
Mm-hmm.
but with the flexibility and convenience of having things delivered right to your door.
Yeah, that's great. I do the vegetable share as my
Mm-hmm.
prime, my default option. But the other day I got some of the dumplings from May, and
Oh,
so it was like, oh man, I need to be getting
so
those
good.
add-ons more because
Those
those are really
are
good.
they're delicious, and it's fun to think about getting really high quality stuff from restaurants that maybe you can't source in the town that you live in, or you can't make
Mm-hmm.
it to that restaurant. But also, it's just like dinner's done, right?
Yeah,
Those dumplings are delicious. They're easy and quick, woman-owned business, locally made. It checks a lot of boxes.
yeah. And actually, Erin, as we're talking, I know where you are and where I am, but can you let folks know what your current areas that you serve?
Sure. So we operate in Massachusetts, primarily in the 495 belt, which is to say Eastern Massachusetts. We're expanding slowly into Central Massachusetts with an eye on getting all the way across the state in the coming year. And recently, we expanded our offering into New Hampshire and Maine, coastal on both. The idea there is that the suite of technologies and systems that we've created, we believe are transferable into different geographies. It's not cookie cutter. You can't just
Mm-hmm.
pick up the whole thing and start all over again somewhere else, but the structure is transferable. So we
Mm-hmm.
wanted to find out if this new way of sourcing, this new way of providing people local food could work not just in Boston, not just in Massachusetts, but could we move to different food hubs, Portland, Maine, Providence, Rhode Island, Hudson Valley? Are there ways in which we could implant this technology and these systems in different geographies? And so far, it's proving that the answer is yes.
Great.
There's a learning curve, there's all sorts of different things that you have to do, but so far it's working. And the goal is to use this as a platform to allow small family farmers, small local producers, the chance to compete at a larger scale. And that's the goal, while
Great.
eliminating waste in the system, while eliminating food waste, et cetera. And it's proving that the model is replicable.
Yeah, that's great. You've mentioned food waste so many
Mm,
times, and I've heard the stat. I think it's what 40% of
that's
the food
correct.
grown in America goes to waste. I when I hear that stat, I think of the stuff you scrape off your plate into the compost
Yeah,
or something, or the veggies you don't use in enough time.
sure.
But you've referenced a couple times that that it's some inefficiencies in the supply chain.
That's
Can you
right.
elaborate a little bit more on how food, and I don't know if you know of how much of that 40% gets wasted before it comes in somebody's home. I suspect a good chunk of it.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of it does come beforehand. So it has to do with food that is grown and then left on the vine. It's not
Hmm.
picked, the
Okay.
vine or the proverbial whatever, because it's bruised, because it's ugly, because it doesn't
Hmm.
fit a certain standard and it's left behind. Some of it is ruined in transit. If you think about tomatoes, for example, they are picked in the majority of like big agriculture when they are bright green and hard
Right.
as rocks, so that then
Yuck.
they can be gassed in transit and appear red when you go and pick them up at whichever place you might buy your
Yeah.
tomatoes. That isn't
Yeah.
us. So they could be ruined in transit. They could be ruined during storage, being kept at poor temperature. They could be ruined um, at the moment of, in the grocery store, nobody picks them up because they are, again, at that point, either bruised or too old or whatever. Or they could just go to waste on our own homes, which happens to all of us. You don't
Hmm.
get to that last bunch of kale or the last couple mushrooms get all woody or something like that. So, and that's just in vegetables. We
Yeah.
haven't even gotten into prepared foods, and we haven't gotten into meats. And I think it's a great tragedy to think about how all this food is going to waste, and how
Hmm.
food is absolutely ubiquitous, right? It's
Hmm.
everywhere. You can get lunch
Right.
at a gas station, and yet there's so much scarcity.
Hmm.
So how do we find a way to address ubiquity and scarcity at the same time? And I think it's a really systemic and important question, one that I don't have the full answer to, but we're
Hmm.
trying to make changes in our little corner of this space.
Great. And my sense just from looking at your offerings every week is I know you're working with a pretty wide array of food producers, farms, and makers, and so forth. Can you give us a little sense of both the numbers of small businesses you're working with, and how do you find them? Because one thing I was thinking about transferable tips. If for somebody sitting outside your service area, if you've learned anything from your experience of how to seek out and find people that you can get good local food from.
Sure. The single greatest thing for a small business, in whether it's procuring or whether it's selling, is word of mouth.
Hmm.
And both of those are tied to a currency of trust. So
Hmm.
it's either we work with a good chicken producer and she wants to suggest a good beef person, or that we work with someone who does tomatoes, who knows someone who does fresh pasta or jellies or whatever. Or we're talking about our customers, someone like you, David, who tells their best friend that they love family dinner and wouldn't this be a great fit for them. That currency of trust is invaluable to us. And
Hmm.
so that's the way that the business has grown, both from the purveyor and the customer side. Lots of just references. But that means that your product, the way you treat your customers, the way you treat your employees, it all has to be solid gold. You have to
Yeah.
do a great job, because otherwise that currency of trust isn't there, and those recommendations don't happen. If you live outside of the Massachusetts area, I think something interesting that farms started to do during the pandemic is start to band together,
Hmm.
realizing, just as I mentioned, that you could grow produce, but you know a person who could do a fish delivery, or you know a person who could do the fresh pastas or the breads or whatever, or the frozen items, pierogi, dumplings, etc. There are a handful in Massachusetts and New Hampshire of places that will deliver to homes that aggregate offerings from different farms, and you can kind of shop in there and have them delivered to your home. I don't know state by state what those look like, but I do know that increasingly local CSAs are trying to find ways to make themselves not just that veggie thing that you're
Yeah.
locked into,
Yeah.
to have different offerings and to kind of combine forces, right?
Hmm.
To be a broader, more flexible offering for folks. So that's kind of where I would start.
Yeah, that sounds good because I suppose in some ways the veggies are the easiest place to start for finding local food, but
Yeah.
that's only obviously there's a lot of other stuff we're eating. So if you can start branching out,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. And
that's
I think
great.
it's always fun if you find one little natural food store or one
Hmm.
little local food store. I love to go in a new place and look at all the stuff. Where is it
Yeah.
made? What do they have? What haven't I heard of? Who's making cool vegetarian proteins? And I try to like go and do that. It's the worst part of the job, doing all the research and getting to taste all this stuff. Like it's so fun. But like if I were living in a different city and state, that's the work that I would do. Is I would go around and find what I like and where they're selling their things.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And do you have time? I know you're busy running this business now in multiple locations, multiple states. Do you have time? Are you mostly going for the prepared food? Or are you a cook at home? Are you curious to know what
Sure,
you're eating
sure. Yeah,
lately?
yeah, yeah.
I know it's got to be fresh and
Yeah.
local, of course.
I have to admit that in the summer I get very lazy. There's always in my house in the summer a loaf of fresh bread, some kind of spreadable cheese. Is it a ricotta or burrata or something? And tomatoes. And I could eat
Hmm.
that, quite honestly, 4 days a week and never
Okay.
get sick of
Yep.
it. Do you add a little bit of tuna and capers on top or some leftover salmon or whatever? I could eat that constantly.
Yeah.
And in the
Sounds good.
winter, that really switches to things that I like to use to empty out my refrigerator.
Hmm.
And this is something I like to think about a lot. As you've got your fridge full of like your kale that looks cruddy or like some leftover onions or
Yeah.
whatever, I love to think about a big pot of things that can mix up all that stuff.
Yep.
And so I love a fried rice or a frittata, and that's always around our house in the winter.
Hmm.
But I'm not above a pizza. I will eat pizza constantly. So though we have, I guess I'm embarrassed to admit it, though we have a local food business, a lot of the times the stuff is just something plus cheese on bread.
Okay, but that works. But if I think like the secret, it's not a secret, I guess, of many chefs is you start with great ingredients and you
Yeah,
don't need to adorn them with a lot of technique or you know a
that's
zillion
exactly right.
ingredients. So
Yeah,
so that
that's exactly
that's
right.
you're able to do that and still eat well. How about we're kind of on the fall is coming. It's still warm today, but fall is coming soon. Any
Hmm.
are the things you're either personally excited about product, things customers really get excited about. New England is obviously big fall. We have a lot of good fall produce, I think.
Yeah, I always get excited. This is going to sound silly, but I always get excited for leeks. I think they're
Okay.
like they sound like they should be on the JV or like the B squad, but
Yeah.
I think they're delicious. I love them fried on top of a fried rice. I love them
Mm,
again in a
sounds
frittata.
good.
Um, if you're really feeling decadent, like I love to make like a gratin with them.
Mhm.
But I think that they don't get a ton of love. And I think one of the important things is with leeks is cutting off the tops and saving them.
Yep.
I always have a bag of like veggie scraps in the
Yep.
freezer, like all the stuff that's left over that when it's time to make a stock, just get dumped into that stock. So you're not
Right.
wasting the food. You're finding time, like you're finding a use for it. And like you're getting a little bit of flavor naturally into your stocks. Because I could, like everybody, I'm not original in saying this, like eat soup all day long in the
Right.
winter and make a ton of it. It's just a great Sunday thing to do.
Hmm.
So I try to I save everything. The bones, the old veggies, the Parmesan rinds is my favorite trick.
Yes, I've heard that's good. That's something I haven't gotten
I
into.
just stuck a
Yeah.
couple of them in the freezer today because then it just like they melt away into nothing and it provides this richness and a saltiness and a fattiness to soup that's really tasty.
Yeah. That makes sense. Oh, delicious. Yeah, it's getting to that season for sure.
It is. It's
So,
like sweater and soup season.
yeah. So any we've covered several topics, covered the ground of your business and stuff. Any other takeaways, that you would, we've talked about food waste, and so forth, but any other nuggets you might share with us from your experience that again might be transferable ways people can do more to eat local and reduce food waste as well at home? That's definitely a great tip about throwing stuff in the freezer.
Yeah.
Um,
um, I, I think that my comment first would be about local food more broadly. Like,
yeah.
I care an enormous amount about food waste, but I think that there's kind of something for everybody in local food.
Hmm.
Whether you really care about the environment and soil, or you care about what goes into your food, pesticides, herbicides, things of that nature, or what doesn't go into your food,
Right.
whether you really care about how animals are treated and raised, what the end of their lives look like, whether you care about worker justice, farmers' rights, food miles, whatever, or just taste,
Yeah. Yeah.
even just taste. There is really something for everyone in the story of local food. So I think that oftentimes local food gets presented as this like super precious bougie thing.
Mhm.
And I don't think so. I really think that there's something for all of us in that story. There's a chapter that you can pull. Um, as far as eliminating waste, I think the key is from the supplier and the business side. What we do is make sure that we order to meet exact demand. We keep near zero inventory, and it means we throw almost nothing out. We donate an enormous amount of food every month that we buy expressly for the point of donation. And if anything just happens to be left over from any week's deliveries, that also gets donated. Because addressing food insecurity as well as addressing food waste is one of the key tenets of family dinner and one of the things we're most proud of.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't even thought about that aspect of. I have no idea how much gets tossed out at a grocery store, but I'm sure
It's
it's
an
significant. And
Sure, or at a
you've got pretty
restaurant,
much zero. Yes,
right?
right,
At a restaurant. And even, from the point of caring about food waste, sure, the point of caring about food insecurity, sure. But if you're just trying to run a business and make it profitable, right? Even just from the black and white, not even the mission driven side of it, the black and white of buying product and throwing it in the trash makes for it to be difficult for a business to be profitable.
right.
But the way that we have set it up and the technologies and the systems that we have set up allows us to order in such a way that the ordering is incredibly tight and then we're not wasting food. And there's almost zero inventory that goes from week to week.
That's great. And there's I like that idea of there's something in it for everyone, because I tend to come at it as it from the foodie side first. I think
Yeah.
the taste and then some of those values, like just make it a bonus that I'm getting this great
Yeah,
tasting
totally.
food and can feel good about it. But I've had guests on here that are, one of my early guests was a sustainability person, and that was her thing. It's like
Yeah.
it's definitely a big tent, and it
I
seems
was
like,
about to say the same thing. It's a big tent.
and it seems like at family dinner, you're kind of hitting all those buttons and conscious of it too, which is great.
Right.
Definitely.
And we want it to be fun also.
Yeah.
So every week we send our customers a newsletter. And the newsletter shares either this is what's in your share this week, here's who grew it. And we try to share anecdotes around like this is this farmer, this is this product, here's how to use these things, here's recipe ideas. And we try to keep it light.
Yeah.
There's terrible jokes in the emails, like bad references to 90s movies and all that kind of stuff, because we're not trying to take the whole thing too seriously because we want local food to still be approachable. We don't want it to feel like a chore.
Yeah. That's a good approach, good philosophy, definitely. Well, good. Let us know. We're kind of wrapping up our time here, but before we close, let's people anywhere can follow you and check out what you're doing, but especially for folks that are in one of your areas here in Massachusetts or New Hampshire or Maine, where can they find you on the web and social media and all that good stuff?
Sure. So the website is familydinner.com.
Yep.
On social, we are there at Share Family Dinner. So Share Family Dinner on Instagram and on Facebook. We're not cool enough for TikTok or interesting enough for Twitter. So we haven't done either of those. But if I can, I'd love to share a code with any of your listeners in our area to give us a shot if they'd be interested.
Yeah, that would work great. Yeah.
So if folks sign up with the code CookLocal, they will get 50% off their first share for anyone who lives in our Massachusetts, New Hampshire, or Maine delivery areas. So it's familydinner.com. CookLocal is your code, and we would love to give you 50% off your first share and love to hear from you about what you think about it.
Great. That's a great offer. We'll be sure to get that out there.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Erin. It's been great chatting with you and getting to know a little bit more about all the good stuff that comes to me every week in that black bag that I anxiously await on Saturday mornings.
David, thank you so much. Thank you for the content of this podcast in general and for elevating the story of local food and cooking and eating and the joys that are associated with all of it. It's just awesome.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cook Local, Eat Local. To get the show notes with links for recipes and resources we covered today, go to cooklocaleatlocal.com to get the podcast landing page. And please be sure to subscribe to Cook Local, Eat Local wherever you get your podcasts. Make it a great day with some tasty local food on your plate.